I still remember the moment my daughter said it. Not whispered, not hinted. She said it loudly, almost proudly. My mother-in-law did it all alone, unlike you. For a second, the room fell silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in the air, it presses on your chest. I stood there, frozen. Her words didn't just sting. They cut through the very place where decades of sacrifice lived. Everyone around us laughed awkwardly, as if it were some harmless joke, but my daughter meant it. I saw it in her eyes, certainty, judgment, and something even worse, misunderstanding. She believed that her mother-in-law was a strong woman who built everything by herself, and she believed I was the opposite. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. How do you respond when your own child, your own flesh and blood, rewrites your entire life in one sentence? She had no idea. Not about the nights I went to bed hungry so she wouldn't. Not about the double shifts I worked to pay her school fees. Not about the rent I covered quietly so she could start her marriage without stress. Not about the medical bills I handled behind the scenes. Not about the debt I carried so she wouldn't have to. But she didn't know. She never knew, because I never told her. And sometimes, silence becomes the mother's greatest mistake. But that day, her words broke something inside me and awakened something else. I took a breath, looked at her, and said calmly, "Then I'll stop paying your bills. Let your mother-in-law bankroll your life." My daughter went silent, completely silent. Her confident face crumbled, confusion replacing pride. Her eyes widened, and she whispered, "What bills?" That whisper, that small, frightened question, was the moment everything changed. This is the story of what happened next. A story of heartbreak, revelation, dignity, and the truth I had buried for years. And if you've ever been a woman who gave everything, only to be told you gave nothing, then this story is also yours. When people look at me today, they see a grandmother, a woman with silver hair and soft wrinkles. They assume I have lived an easy life, quiet, comfortable, unchallenged. But I wasn't always this woman. I was 27 when life slammed its first door in my face. I was left alone, with a baby girl, and no one to help me. My husband walked out when our daughter was barely 6 months old. No discussion, no apology, just gone. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding my crying child, wondering how I would afford diapers the next week. No one saw me then. No one admired my strength. I was invisible. I took 3 jobs, not because I wanted to be a superhero, but because I had no choice. During the day, I cleaned houses. In the evenings, I worked at a grocery store. At night, I sewed clothes for neighbors to earn extra coins. I didn't sleep. I didn't rest. But I did survive. Not one person ever came to say, "You are a strong woman. You built life on your own. You did it alone." And it never mattered to me. What mattered was that my daughter ate well, dressed well, and never felt abandoned. When she got sick at age 7, I sold my wedding ring to pay for the hospital bills. She never knew. I told her the ring was misplaced. When her school fees were due, and I didn't have enough, I pawned my late mother's bracelet, the only thing she left me. I never told anyone. I refused vacations. I refused outings. I refused even birthday gifts for myself, because every extra coin went to her future. In my culture, people say a woman must be strong and never talk about her pain, so I didn't. I didn't talk about the nights I ate plain rice while she enjoyed a full meal. I didn't talk about the months I worked without a day off. I didn't talk about the pain in my back, the swelling in my legs, the migraines I ignored. To her, life felt normal. That was my goal, to shield her from the depth of my sacrifices. Some people might say that was my mistake, but I never regretted being a mother, because when she smiled, just a simple smile, it told me I was doing enough. When she hugged me before school, it felt worth it. When she said, "Mom, I love you," nothing else mattered. I raised her to see love, but I never taught her to see suffering. I thought protecting her from the harsh truths of life was the right thing. I thought shielding her from the financial storms was my duty. I thought silence was noble. What I didn't know was that years later, that silence would come back like a knife, and that the child I protected from every storm would one day compare me to someone she barely knew. Because love without explanation becomes misunderstood. Sacrifices without receipts become invisible. and motherhood, without recognition, becomes weakness in the eyes of others. And I didn't realize that the very things I hid from her, to protect her, would one day be used to judge me. This was the backstory my daughter never knew. This was the foundation of every unpaid bill, every emergency I covered, every burden I carried, all the things she assumed just happened. Not because life was easy for me, but because I stood in the fire and never let her feel the heat. People assume betrayal happens suddenly. In truth, it grows, slowly, like cracks in a wall, barely visible at first, but dangerous when ignored. The first time my daughter compared me to her mother-in-law, it didn't come out viciously, it came wrapped in admiration, but also, unintentionally, criticism. She had just married, and she was overflowing with praise about her husband's family, particularly the woman she began calling Mom, her mother-in-law. It started with small statements. She's so organized. She managed to raise her children without help. She built her own business. I listened, smiled, nodded. I wanted her to be proud of her extended family. I wanted her to feel loved and supported. But slowly, the tone changed. Her comparisons started to have sharper edges. One day, she said, "Mom, my mother-in-law is so independent. She doesn't rely on anyone. She built her life with her own 2 hands." I froze for a moment. Not because I envied the woman. No. But because the implication was clear. I had not built anything. I had not done anything. I had not succeeded. And my daughter believed that. But I didn't defend myself. Not then. Not ever. I simply told her I was glad she admired her mother-in-law. I thought it would pass. I thought she was just excited about her new family. I thought she would eventually see that admiration didn't require comparison. But admiration turned into comparison. Comparison turned into judgment. Judgment turned into disrespect. The mother-in-law she idolized was a successful businesswoman. She owned a shop, a small restaurant, and some property. And every time my daughter mentioned her success, there was a question behind her eyes. Why couldn't you be like that? It was never spoken, but it was loud. I remember one evening at her home, while we were having dinner, her husband was talking about his mother's accomplishments. Everyone nodded in admiration. And then my daughter said something that stayed with me like a stain on the soul. My mother-in-law did it all alone. She's a real woman, strong. There was emphasis on the word real. Everyone looked at me, just for a moment. Not accusingly, but with curiosity, as though they wondered what I had done with my life. I sat there quietly, drinking water to keep tears from rising. I could have spoken. I could have explained everything I endured. I could have listed every sacrifice. But motherhood is strange. We stay silent, not because we are weak, but because we choose not to shame our children. We carry pain like a secret, because dignity matters more than validation. Days turned into weeks, and my daughter's admiration for her mother-in-law grew into something unsettling. When she needed advice, she called her mother-in-law. When she needed help, she asked her mother-in-law. When she needed approval, she looked to her mother-in-law. And I remained in the shadows, the mother who did nothing alone. I never resented the other woman. Not once. She had her story, and I respected it. What hurt me wasn't her. It was the fact that my daughter couldn't see me at all. In my daughter's eyes, her mother-in-law was strength. I was softness. Her mother-in-law was independence. I was someone who always needed help. Her mother-in-law was impressive. I was ordinary. Her mother-in-law built wealth. I built resilience. And yet what my daughter failed to realize was this. Strength is not always loud. Independence is not always public. Success is not always measured in money. Sometimes the strongest women are the ones who survive storms silently. Another day, she told me this with a chuckle. "You know, Mom, my mother-in-law never asked anyone for anything. She saved, she worked smart, she made smart choices. She's the kind of woman I want to be." I smiled, but inside, something hurt. Not because she admired someone else, but because she didn't understand what it means to struggle without leaving evidence. Her mother-in-law built a business. Yes, that's admirable. But I built a child, without ever letting her feel the weight of lack. One day, she and her husband stopped by my place unexpectedly. We were talking about budgeting and expenses, and then she said something cruel without realizing it. I love how my mother-in-law doesn't depend on anyone to pay her bills. She is truly self-made. I stayed silent. I swallowed my pain. But that pain had a direction, a path, a meaning. My silence wasn't weakness. It was protection, because if I had spoken the truth then, she would have broken in ways she wasn't ready for. You see, sometimes mothers wait, not because they can't speak, but because timing decides impact, and the moment would come, the moment when her ignorance would shatter, the moment when she would understand what motherhood really looks like. That moment would come unexpectedly, in a way she never imagined, and it would start with one whisper, "What bills?" But before that moment arrived, she had one more comparison to deliver, one that would break me more deeply than the rest. And when it came, I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I simply decided it was time for truth to speak louder than silence. There comes a point in life when silence is no longer peace. It becomes a prison, and for mothers, silence becomes the chains we willingly wear. Not because we are weak, but because the truth is heavier than anyone realizes. To outsiders, I was a quiet woman, reserved, gentle, not flashy, not boastful, not the type to talk about what I had done or what I had endured. But quietness is not emptiness. Inside me lived truths I never spoke, truths that shaped my life and my daughter's future, truths that no one ever saw, because mothers rarely advertise their pain. Truth 1: Mothers sacrifice in silence. People talk about women who start businesses, build empires, dominate industries, and yes, that's strength. But there is another kind of strength: wiping tears alone at midnight, sitting in a cold hospital waiting room, praying your child survives, stretching money so far it turns into miracles, pretending you are full when you've eaten nothing, so your child can have the last plate. These aren't accomplishments you post on social media. There are no trophies for them, no applause, no praise, but those sacrifices build lives. Silent sacrifices are still sacrifices. My daughter never saw those moments, but she lived because of them. And that is a truth most children discover too late. Truth 2: Strength does not always look like success. Her mother-in-law, in my daughter's eyes, was an example, a self-made woman, strong, independent, accomplished. But people measure strength incorrectly. Strength is not the business someone owns. Strength is surviving when everyone expects you to break. Strength is working 3 jobs and still managing to raise a child with dignity. Strength is carrying burdens without collapsing. Strength is pretending to be okay, so your child never knows the world tried to destroy you. I didn't own a shop. I didn't own property. I didn't have savings. But I owned perseverance. And yet, that kind of strength is invisible to those who never needed it. Truth 3: The hardest battles are fought alone. I fought battles no one knew. Battles against debt. Battles against exhaustion. Battles against loneliness. Battles against shame. And the hardest battle of all: being strong while pretending everything was fine. The world tells women, don't complain, don't show weakness, don't talk about struggle. So we suffer in silence. We hide tears. We conceal fears. We bury heartbreaks. We do it because love demands it. My daughter never saw those battles, because I never allowed her to. I believed protecting her meant shielding her from pain, but I didn't realize that shielding her from pain would also shield her from understanding. Truth 4: Love sometimes becomes misinterpreted. I didn't tell her about the sacrifices, the debts I cleared, the loans I repaid, the meals I skipped, the nights I cried, the dreams I abandoned. I didn't tell her because I wanted to be strong for her. But here is the irony: when you love in silence, people mistake that silence for weakness. When you sacrifice in private, people think you did nothing. And when you don't speak of your struggles, others believe you never had any. My daughter didn't mean to belittle me. She didn't intend cruelty. She simply misunderstood my silence. Silence becomes a shadow, and shadows don't reveal truth. They hide it. Truth 5: Children judge what they don't know. Her comparisons came from ignorance, not malice. She looked at life through her limited understanding. My mother-in-law built her business. My mother-in-law doesn't need anyone. My mother-in-law stands strong, and in her mind, that meant, you didn't build anything. You always needed help. You never stood strong. But she didn't know about the rent I quietly paid after her husband lost his job, the emergency medical bill I covered when she got sick, the credit card debt I handled behind the scenes, the utility bill I paid last winter when her heating was nearly cut off, the silent financial support I provided her every month without ever taking credit. She didn't know, not because she didn't care, but because I never told her. And this is the truth. Mothers live with, we give the most, but speak the least. Truth 6, we protect them from reality. Too well. I believed that a mother's role was to carry burdens alone. I believed silence was dignity. I believed secrets were protection. But motherhood has a strange consequence. When we protect our children from the storm, they think we never walked through rain. When we hide the sacrifices, they believe there were none. When we make life seem easy, they assume it truly was. My daughter saw only the calm. She never saw the hurricane behind it. Truth 7. One day, silence must break. There comes a time when truth demands to be spoken. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Not to hurt anyone, but to teach. That moment hadn't arrived yet, but it was coming. When she whispered, "What bills?" that was the moment the truth cracked open. Not just the truth about the bills, but the truth about motherhood itself. But before that moment, I needed to face one more truth, one that had been haunting me for years. I never wanted her to admire me. I just wanted her to understand me. Not to worship me, just to see me. Not to praise me, just to recognize me. Not to compare me, just to know me. That desire, the deep, quiet longing of every mother, is the truth we never say. But soon I would finally have the chance to speak. And when that moment came, it would change everything. There are things you can overlook when they are said among family. There are words you can swallow when they are spoken behind closed doors. But some wounds are deeper because they happen in the open, where the world watches, judges, and forms its own opinion. This was that moment for me. It happened at a family gathering. It was a Sunday afternoon, a small family get-together at her home. People from her husband's side were there. Aunts, cousins, the mother-in-law herself. Even some family friends I barely knew. The room was full of laughter, conversation, and stories. I sat quietly, smiling, listening, like mothers often do. I wasn't the center of attention, nor did I want to be. But then, the topic shifted. Someone mentioned the rising cost of living, how difficult it was to maintain a household, and her husband made a passing joke. "I don't know how my mother managed all this alone." People chuckled. Everyone turned to admire the mother-in-law. And then my daughter said it. Not softly, not hesitantly, not in private, but loudly, clear enough for every corner of the room to hear. Exactly. My mother-in-law did everything alone. Unlike my mother, she always needed help. She never stood on her own. There was a pause, a painful, suffocating, heavy pause. Laughter died. Smiles faded. Eyes shifted toward me. Not with anger, not with hostility, but with something worse. Pity. The pity reserved for someone who has failed. I sat there frozen, trying to process what she said, trying not to react, trying not to let my voice tremble or my face change. Have you ever been stabbed in the heart and forced to sit still, forced to remain composed because dignity is all you have left? That was me in that moment. She didn't stop. She didn't realize what she had done. She didn't realize what her words meant. She kept talking. My mother-in-law raised 3 kids alone, ran a business, paid every bill, never complained, never asked anyone for money. She didn't depend on anyone. That's real strength. She paused only to breathe, not to think. That was the moment everything changed, because suddenly, after speaking so boldly, she looked at me, really looked at me, and what she saw wasn't weakness. It was pain. Quiet, but undeniable, and something shifted in her eyes. She realized she had spoken in front of people. She realized her words had landed harder than she expected. She realized she had humiliated her own mother, publicly, but pride stopped her from apologizing. She swallowed, blinked, and turned away. I sat there, silent, holding my dignity like a fragile keepsake. But inside me, something new formed. Not a desire to fight, not a desire to prove myself, but a quiet awareness that truth was coming, whether she was ready or not. Because life has a funny way of speaking on your behalf. Mothers may stay silent for years, but destiny never remains silent forever. And the truth she thought didn't exist, the sacrifices she thought I never made, were about to unfold in a way no one in that room ever expected, not to shame her, not to punish her, but to show her the weight of love she never saw. And that moment was closer than she could have imagined. I stood there, holding my breath, and for the first time, I didn't speak out of anger. I spoke out of truth. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, not as the once baby I cradled, not as the little girl I raised, but as a grown woman who still carried misunderstandings, wounds, and blind spots. I said quietly, "Let me tell you something you should have known long ago." My voice wasn't shaking anymore. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't desperate. It was steady, like a river that has seen storms, floods, droughts, and still flows. I told her, "You praise your mother-in-law for doing it all alone. You call her strong, independent, a superwoman. I am not jealous of her. I am not in competition with her. But let me tell you the truth you never saw." I explained the life she never bothered to understand. I didn't do it alone like she did, because I did something harder. I carried the emotional weight, the loneliness, and the stress so you never had to see it. She did everything herself because she had no choice. I did everything silently because I chose to sacrifice. You think strength is only visible work, lifting boxes, repairing walls, working 3 shifts. But real strength is invisible. It's crying in the bathroom so your children never see the tears. It's holding your frustration so they never carry guilt. It's being the backbone when nobody notices. I told her, "You compare me to her only because you don't know my story. You think silence means weakness. But silence was my shield. It protected you. You think my life was easier because I had help. No, I made sacrifices she never had to make. I stayed in a marriage that was painful because I wanted you to grow up with stability. I worked jobs that took years off my life so you could go to school. I faced criticism, judgment, loneliness, and I didn't tell you because children don't need adult burdens." And then I spoke the part that shocked everyone. I never wanted applause. I never wanted to be seen as a hero. But I did expect one thing from you: respect. Not praise, not worship, just respect. I acknowledged my flaws. Was I perfect? No. I made mistakes. I got tired. I was human. But every decision I made came from love, from wanting you to have a better life than I did. Then I turned toward her friends, not to embarrass her, but to teach. You never know a mother's story by looking at her. You never know her battles. You only see the scars when you ask. If you judge one mother by comparing her to another, you will always misunderstand both. Then back to my daughter. You see your mother-in-law as a warrior because she fought visibly, but I fought silently. And the silent fighters are often the strongest. The silence that followed was powerful. Her friends didn't giggle anymore. No one shifted uncomfortably. Even the mother-in-law looked stunned. Not angry, not defensive, just reflective, as though she never realized the pain behind my quietness. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. For years, she saw me as weak. For years, she compared me to someone she didn't fully know. For years, she misunderstood me because I never explained myself. And in that moment, she finally began to understand. Not everything, not completely, but more than ever before. I don't want you to apologize to me. I don't want you to feel ashamed. Just don't judge me until you know my story. And one day, you will stand where I stood, with a daughter of your own. And I hope she gives you the understanding you denied me. So yes, she did it all alone. But I did it all silently. And both kinds of strength deserve respect. And with that, I sat silently, not triumphant, not bitter, just relieved that finally, after decades, my truth had a voice. I had just finished speaking. I had just poured out the truth of my life, my sacrifices, my battles fought in silence. The room was quiet. The weight of what I said seemed to hang in the air like a dense fog. And then she whispered it. Not loudly, not angrily, just a soft, frightened question that pierced my heart. "What, Bills?" The words were so small, yet they hit harder than anything she had said to me before. I could see the confusion on her face. The realization that she didn't know a single thing, the dawning horror that everything she had assumed about me was wrong. I began slowly, because this was too much for her to hear all at once. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You want to know what bills? You want to know the debts I carried while you slept peacefully in your bed?" Her eyes widened, her mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to catch her breath, and I began, "The rent I paid for your first apartment with your husband. You think it came from thin air? I quietly covered it for months when your savings ran out, so that you could start your life together without fear. The electricity, the water, the gas, every month, I made sure you never had a blackout, even when my own bills went unpaid, even when I skipped meals so I could pay yours, when you were sick, when your husband had an emergency, when your children needed vaccines. I took money I didn't have. I went without so you could get what you needed, without asking anyone else. You think the degrees you proudly earned were your own alone. I quietly paid off loans, cleared debts, negotiated with banks, all so you could walk across that stage with dignity, unaware. When your car broke down, or when you had no money for childcare, I was there, unseen, uncredited. I handled every crisis, every small disaster, every unexpected expense. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to believe the world was kind. I paused. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, her hands clutched at the table. She had no idea, not a clue. And then I continued, because the truth had to be complete. Did you ever wonder how groceries arrived, every week, even when I had barely enough for myself? Did you ever wonder who paid for the clothes your children wore when your account was empty? Did you ever question why emergencies never ruined your plans? Her eyes filled with tears, now, not just surprise, not just shock, but guilt. A guilt I had waited decades for her to feel, not to punish her, but to awaken understanding. All of this, I did alone, even though I had others who could have helped. I did it silently, not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was my duty, because I loved you. I leaned back, exhausted from the flood of words, because the truth, when it is heavy, takes everything to reveal. Her hands were shaking now, her voice cracked, as she whispered, I never knew, I didn't know any of this. Mom, I'm so sorry." I stopped her there. I didn't want her to break down in shame. I wanted understanding. I wanted her to see, finally, what love really looks like. I said softly, "Don't apologize, just listen, just remember, this is the reality of what it means to sacrifice in silence. And maybe, now, you'll understand the strength I carried for you all these years." The room was still, everyone else was silent. Her husband, her mother-in-law, even her friends, they had no idea what had been revealed. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation for them. It wasn't a show. It was the unveiling of a life lived quietly, a love given completely, a strength unseen. For years, I had been invisible to her, misunderstood, underestimated, taken for granted. But now, even in that small whisper, "What bills?" I knew the veil had lifted. Her perception of me would never be the same again. She was seeing me, truly seeing me, and that alone, after decades of silent sacrifice, felt like vindication. The moment she asked, "What bills?" a quiet shift happened in the room. It was as if the air itself had paused to listen, and I knew then, the time for silence was over. I drew in a slow breath and began to speak, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a clarity that only years of endurance can produce. "I will tell you everything," I said, my voice steady, "because you need to understand what your life has cost me, what I carried so you never would." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. She looked small and frightened, like she had just stepped into a storm she couldn't see the edges of. "Do you know how many nights I went to bed with an empty stomach, so that you could have dinner and not feel lack? Do you know how many times I skipped my own medications, so I could pay yours? Do you know how many sleepless nights I spent working multiple jobs, just to make sure you could go to school, to college, to your first apartment without fear?" Her hands gripped the edge of the table. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't judging. She was finally listening. "The bills," I continued, letting each word fall slowly, like stones into a deep river, "rent for every apartment you've ever lived in, even when I couldn't afford my own. Your electricity, your water, your gas, every month, I made sure you never had a blackout. The car you drive now, repaired, insured, fueled, that all came from me. Emergencies, broken pipes, sudden illnesses, last-minute flights, unexpected accidents, I handled them all quietly, without ever asking for thanks. Student loans, tuition fees, school trips, books, uniforms, every penny, every cent, covered, so you could live, learn, and dream. And all the small things, groceries, birthday gifts, medical checkups, clothes, the things that make life comfortable, things you never noticed. I paused. I needed her to feel the weight, to see the mountain I had carried silently for decades. You think your life happened on its own? You think the world just gave you comfort and opportunity? No, I paid for it, silently, invisibly, with my back bent, my heart heavy, my body aching. I carried it all alone, so you would never have to. Her eyes were wide, tears welled, but she didn't speak. Her lips quivered, her hands shook. I could see the understanding beginning to dawn, a mixture of guilt, disbelief, and awe. She whispered, barely audible, "Mom, I didn't know. I never realized," and that's when I knew. I had reached her. Not fully, but enough that the dam had begun to crack. Everyone else, her husband, her mother-in-law, the cousins and friends, they watched in stunned silence. This was not a spectacle. This was not drama. This was truth being revealed in its purest, rawest form. I was no longer the quiet, invisible mother. I was the woman who had carried everything, endured everything, and given everything, silently, and now, she knew. I continued, letting my voice soften, because the most important part wasn't the list of bills, but the message beneath it. I never told you these things to boast. I never told you because I didn't want your life to feel like a debt you owed me. I never told you because being a mother is not about recognition. It is about sacrifice. It is about giving, without asking for anything in return. She looked down at her hands. Her body trembled. And then, slowly, she raised her eyes, looking at me not with judgment, not with pride, but with something new. Recognition, understanding, respect. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea. I didn't see." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "I don't want your apologies. I want you to see what strength really is. I want you to carry it with you, not as a debt, but as a lesson." Then I said something that made her pause, something she would never forget. "You see your mother-in-law as strong because she fought visibly. You see her independence because you can see the work she did. But I fought in the shadows. I fought silently, so you could grow up believing the world was fair and safe. And that, my child, is a strength few understand." She nodded, tears streaming freely now. For the first time, I could see her truly comprehending the weight of what I had done, and the mistake she had made in ever comparing me to anyone else. I wanted her to feel more than guilt. I wanted her to feel respect. I wanted her to understand that the truest love is often invisible, unacknowledged, and completely selfless. "You may never fully understand every sacrifice," I said softly, "but the smallest acknowledgement, the smallest recognition, is enough for a mother, and you, now see it. That is enough for me." Her hands shook as she brought them to her face. She was finally letting herself feel the weight of decades of silent work, and the realization of how little she had truly understood. The room remained silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't tense. It was reverent, as if truth itself had paused to catch its breath. This moment changed everything. It wasn't the end, but it was the climax. The moment where understanding began to replace ignorance, where respect began to replace judgment, and where love, hidden and quiet for so long, finally spoke for itself. And I knew then that from this point on, nothing would ever be the same between us. After the storm of revelation, after the words had settled in the room like fallen leaves, there was a quiet that wasn't emptiness. It was understanding. I sat back in my chair and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was no longer the little girl I had held in my arms. She was a woman, but a woman who had just begun to understand what it means to be raised by someone who sacrificed everything in silence. And in that moment, I reflected on all the unseen mothers, the ones who are forgotten in the stories we tell. We are everywhere, in kitchens, in hospital rooms, in offices and laundries, In quiet corners where no one sees us struggle, we are the mothers who wake before sunrise and go to bed after midnight. We are the ones who skip meals, hide pain, and carry burdens, so our children never know the weight of life. We do not fight for recognition. We do not ask for praise. We simply endure. And yet, the world often overlooks us. The world measures strength by visibility, not by endurance, by applause, not by tears wiped in silence, by trophies, not by lives protected. But the truth is, the unseen mothers are the strongest. I thought back to the countless nights I spent worrying, when she was sick, when she needed something I could barely afford, when life seemed too heavy for just one set of shoulders. I remember standing over her crib and whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I remember telling myself, if she grows up safe, happy, and loved, it doesn't matter how tired I am, how hungry I am, or how alone I feel. That's the essence of motherhood, isn't it? The sacrifices no one sees, the love no one acknowledges, the strength that goes unrecognized. And as I reflected on all of it, I realized that our lives are filled with these invisible victories. Silence is both a shield and a burden. I shielded my daughter from the storm, but in doing so, I allowed her to misunderstand me. I protected her from the weight of my sacrifices, but in doing so, I made my strength invisible. And yet, I do not regret it, because motherhood is not about being understood. It is about loving anyway, even when the world misjudges us, even when the ones we raise compare us to others. Watching my daughter finally comprehend the truth, watching her eyes fill with tears and awe, was a quiet triumph. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about bridging the gap between her ignorance and my life. It was about giving her a glimpse of what mothers truly do when no one is watching. And in that moment, I realized every mother deserves this recognition, not because she asks for it, but because the truth cannot remain hidden forever. To the women watching this who have raised children quietly, sacrificed without recognition, and endured in silence, your life matters. Your sacrifices matter. Your strength, unseen though it may be, has shaped lives in ways that cannot be measured. You may never receive applause. You may never hear words of gratitude. You may never be acknowledged in the way you deserve. But know this, the love you gave in silence has built foundations stronger than any visible accomplishment, and when your children finally understand, even a whisper of acknowledgement can change everything. As I looked around that room, at my daughter, her husband, her children, I saw something profound. The seeds I planted silently, the sacrifices I bore quietly, had blossomed, not because they thanked me, not because they noticed me, but because they grew into lives of security, comfort, and opportunity, lives I protected at all costs. And that is the real victory. We, the unseen mothers, are everywhere. We are the backbone of families, the silent warriors, the protectors of dreams, the hidden strength that makes the world go round. And finally, after years of sacrifice, misunderstanding, and quiet endurance, there comes a moment when the truth is seen, when the love is recognized, when the silent strength is finally honored. That moment may not last forever, but it lasts long enough for us to know we were never invisible, we were never weak, we were, and always will be, strong beyond measure. Her transformation didn't stop with words. It began to show in her actions. She started checking in more often. She offered to help, without being asked. She included me in decisions. She began to listen, really listen, to the quiet, often overlooked parts of life that I had always carried, and the smallest gestures spoke volumes. A meal cooked together, a shared cup of tea, a hug, long and sincere, where no words were needed. More than anything, I noticed the shift in her eyes. Where once there had been judgment, comparison, and expectation, now there was understanding. Where once there had been distance, now there was connection. Where once there had been silence and ignorance, now there was recognition. She began to see me as I truly was, not perfect, not invincible, but strong beyond measure, resilient beyond recognition, and filled with quiet love that had never asked for applause. Over the weeks that followed, the change became permanent. She began to speak of me differently. She shared my stories with her children, acknowledging the sacrifices I had made. She expressed pride, not in comparison to others, but in who I was and what I had endured, and in that transformation, I saw hope. Hope that her children would see me as more than a grandmother. Hope that the cycle of misunderstanding and comparison could end with the next generation. Watching my daughter transform taught me one of life's most profound truths: understanding does not happen instantly. Respect is not demanded, it is earned over time, through observation, experience, and revelation. Love, when it is tested by misunderstanding and hardship, grows deeper and more resilient when it is finally recognized. And sometimes, the most profound transformations occur not in public displays or grand gestures, but in quiet awakenings, in the small subtle shifts that ripple through hearts and lives. My daughter no longer saw me as someone who needed help or someone who fell short. She saw me as I had always been, a mother who fought silently, loved endlessly, and carried a lifetime of strength. And in that recognition, a new chapter began, one filled with understanding, tenderness, and the kind of love that only comes after decades of being unseen, yet never giving up. The transformation was complete, not because words changed, but because hearts finally understood. As I reflect on everything, the comparisons, the judgments, the revelations, and the eventual reconciliation, I realize there are lessons here for every woman watching this story, especially those of us who are over 60. Life has a way of testing patience, endurance, and love. It challenges us in ways that no one else can see, and it often asks us to give without acknowledgement. But there is wisdom in these experiences. Many of us carry burdens quietly. We manage homes, finances, family dynamics, and emotional storms without anyone noticing. Our children, partners, and even close family may not see the full scope of what we do. But invisible strength is still strength. Sacrifice done in silence is still heroic, and endurance, even when unacknowledged, shapes lives in ways that are profound and lasting. Never underestimate what your quiet work has accomplished. Never diminish the love you've poured into your family just because it hasn't been recognized. For decades, I stayed silent, protecting my daughter from the truth of my struggles. I thought it was for her benefit, and in many ways it was. But silence can also allow misunderstandings to grow, comparisons to fester, and respect to be lost. There comes a time when sharing your story, gently and honestly, can transform relationships. It may not be easy, and it may not always be received well at first. But truth, spoken with love, has the power to heal. Our children, and even society, often measure a mother's worth by visible accomplishments. They may praise another woman and unintentionally diminish your efforts. It is important to remember every mother's journey is unique. Strength can take many forms, some visible, some hidden. Do not let comparisons steal your joy or diminish your sense of accomplishment. Even after decades of being misunderstood or underestimated, my daughter finally saw the truth. She finally understood the sacrifices, the struggles, and the silent love that had shaped her life. And while recognition may not come early, or even at all, it does not lessen the value of what you have done. Keep loving, keep giving, and keep showing up, even when the world doesn't notice. Your life's work has impact beyond what you can see. Reconciliation is not about proving someone wrong. It is about building understanding, respect, and love. When my daughter finally recognized my sacrifices, it allowed us to heal. It created space for connection, tenderness, and growth. Forgiveness and openness, even after years of misunderstanding, can transform relationships and allow your heart to find peace. All the unseen sacrifices, quiet love, and invisible endurance become a legacy. Your children, grandchildren, and even future generations benefit from the foundation you have built, whether they fully understand it now or not. Never doubt the significance of what you've done. The love you've given in silence is shaping lives in ways you may never fully see. No matter your age, no matter the years of silence or misunderstanding, there is still time to be understood, respected, and appreciated. You can share your story. You can create moments of recognition. You can inspire understanding, not only in your children, but in everyone who witnesses your strength. To every senior woman watching this, you are strong beyond measure. Your love is deep and enduring. Your sacrifices, seen or unseen, matter. Do not let anyone, not even your own children, diminish your worth. Do not underestimate the power of your quiet strength. And do not forget that, one day, your story can change hearts, even the ones that doubted you most. Remember your life, your love, your strength. They are your legacy, and your legacy is extraordinary. As we reach the end of this story, I want you to pause and reflect. This is not just my story, it is the story of countless mothers, grandmothers, and women who have carried their families silently, endured challenges unseen, and loved without asking for recognition. If you've ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or underestimated, know this: your strength matters, your sacrifices matter, and your love matters. Think of the unseen work you've done, the quiet moments of endurance, the tears wiped in silence, the love you've poured into your family without applause. You are not invisible, you are not weak, you are extraordinary. If this video touched your heart, here's what you can do. Like this video, it helps other women see they are not alone. Comment below, share your story, or tell us where you are watching from. I want to hear from women all over the world because your voice matters. Subscribe if you want more empowering stories from women over 60 who are learning to embrace their strength, live boldly, and be truly seen. Share with a daughter, granddaughter, friend, or anyone who needs to know their quiet sacrifices are meaningful. Let me leave you with this: never let anyone diminish your worth, never let silence hide your strength, and never forget the legacy of a mother's love is powerful, lasting, and unforgettable. Thank you for watching. And remember, you are stronger than you know, and your story deserves to be heard.